All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be looking at this incredibly dense, wild 300-year stretch in South India, roughly between the 6th and 9th century CE. When you look back at history, it's pretty wild how periods of really intense political rivalry, like massive power struggles, can actually act as a giant catalyst for change. And wow, is that exactly what happened here? This wasn't just, kings squabbling over borders. It was a literal fiery crucible that sparked a cultural and spiritual renaissance that basically redefined the entire Indian subcontinent. It's a huge deal.
So that brings us to the big question, right? The core of what we're digging into today. How exactly did a 300-year war end up creating some of the absolute greatest wonders of the world? I mean, it is so easy to look at history and just see this boring, dusty list of dead kings and dates you have to memorize. But guys, this is a deeply human story. We're talking about an epic, heavyweight feud mainly between two massive dynasties, the Chalukyas and the Pallavas. Their relentless ambition, their frankly towering egos, and this desperate need to outdo each other. All of that transformed the landscape of South India into a canvas for some of the most breathtaking art and architecture you will ever see. And the coolest part, we know all about this drama not just from myths, but from actual, tangible evidence. Take a look at this quote right here. It literally boasts about a Pallava king who, and I quote, wrote the syllables of the word victory on Pulakeshin's back and destroyed Vatapi. I mean, come on, that is some serious ancient trash talk. We know this history so intimately because these kings were meticulous. They carved their victory boasts, their land grants, and their really bitter rivalries directly onto copper plates, temple walls, and giant stone pillars, basically leaving the receipts for all of eternity.
Now, a really crucial point here is that these records weren't just written in some lofty, elite language. They were carved across multiple vernacular languages. We're talking Tamil, Sanskrit, Kannada, and Telugu. Having this multilingual historical record is essentially our direct window into the political and cultural life of ancient South India. It shows us that this society was incredibly diverse and, honestly, super interconnected. These kings were actively trying to flex their power and their piety to a massive, culturally rich population. They wanted everyone to know who was boss. Okay, let's track this timeline for a second because the pacing here is just relentless. So in 543 CE, the Chalukya king Pulikesen I sets up his stronghold by fortifying Badami. Fast forward a bit, and his grandson Pulikesen II goes on an absolute tear, literally defeating the army of the great northern king Harshavardhana. But wait, the Pallavas strike back hard. The Pallava king Narasimhavarman I attacks, occupies the Chalukya capital of Badami, and Pulikesen II actually dies in that battle. It's this brutal back-and-forth conquest, capitals being sacked left and right, until finally, by the mid-8th century, new players, the Rashtrakutas, step in and overpower the Chalukyas. It is high-stakes political theater at its absolute peak. So you might be wondering, how on earth did they pay for all this non-stop warfare? Well, this temple at Kanchipuram gives us a pretty stark answer. War was actually incredibly crucial to the state's economy. The loot and the booty they grabbed from these constant military campaigns directly funded the state and these massive building projects. If you look really closely at the walls of this specific temple, you can see these super vivid sculptures carved right into the stone. You've got troops attacking high ramparts, elephants standing by. They were quite literally carving their military funding strategies onto the walls of the divine structures that those very funds helped build. It's wild. And naturally, all that military competition quickly spilled over into a full-blown architectural arms race. Just check out this comparison. On one side, you've got the magnificent Chalukya structural temples at Pattadakal. And over on the other side, the absolutely iconic Pallava Shore Temple at Mamallapuram. The fight for dominance wasn't just about who had the biggest army anymore. It turned into a literal race to build the most magnificent structural temples. They were steering ideas from each other, poaching skilled craftspeople, and just pushing the absolute boundaries of what was architecturally possible, all to prove their supreme power and, divine favor. Now, I want you to just take a second to really think about the scale and the sheer sweat required here. We are talking about carving absolute wonders out of solid, single rocks. And they did this without modern engineering, no advanced metallurgy, no knowledge of modern trigonometry. Entire multi-story temples were just excavated directly out of the sides of mountains in massive boulders. The willpower, the pure artisanal genius, and the immense labor force it took to pull this off, it's honestly staggering to even try to comprehend. But here's what's really fascinating.
Amidst all this aggressive royal posturing, there was also incredible support for heterodox sects. Look at this brilliant sculpture of the Buddha in meditation from the Ellora caves. The patrons for these caves ranged from the Chalukya to the Rashtrakuta dynasties, and what we see here is the classical model of the Buddha, right? Representing this absolute embodiment of benevolence and peace. It is such a striking contrast. You have this incredible stillness and search for inner peace, standing smack in the middle of an era that was completely defined by violent political chaos. And the genius of this era wasn't strictly limited to stone carving either. The painting is out of this world. Just look at this stunning bodhisattva from the Ajanta caves. The ancient painting techniques they used were so ingenious. They didn't just slap paint on raw rock. Oh no, they created a highly specific plaster recipe. It was this mix of vegetable fibers, paddy husks, rock grit, and sand, all overlaid with a super thin layer of lime, sometimes even reinforced it with cloth. Then they extracted these brilliant natural mineral pigments to create breathtaking murals. The way they captured human emotions, compassion, peace, love, with such masterful skill is just phenomenal. All right, let's head over to the coast and see how this whole movement builds at Mamallapuram, specifically with the iconic Panchapandava of the Pallavas. These are monolithic temples, meaning they are carved entirely out of single, massive rocks. But what makes them so incredibly special is how the artists masterfully blended these grand, ancient Puranic figures with popular, everyday local stories right there in the stone. So it wasn't just high art for the wealthy elites, it was art that actually communicated with everyone. It bridged that massive gap between grand mythology and the daily lives of the regular folks walking right past them. But of course, maintaining these massive armies, carving giant rock temples, and just generally running an empire, it's incredibly expensive. So the million-dollar question, who paid for it all? Well, the everyday people, naturally. And the Pallava administration got amazingly specific with their taxes. I mean, they taxed everything. Draft cattle, toddy drawers, potters, goldsmiths, washermen, weavers, makers of ghee. They even had a tax for marriage parties. I know, a marriage party tax sounds a bit funny to us today, but this highly organized, hyper-local taxation was exactly what funded the state's huge ambitions, not to mention the essential upkeep of local village irrigation tanks that literally kept their agriculture alive. So all of this, the intense royal patronage, the explosive construction of these massive temple centers, the deeply interconnected society, it all set the stage for something truly revolutionary. We start seeing the birth of a massive grassroots spiritual revolution known as the Bhakti movement. Suddenly, temples were no longer just these distant royal monuments. They became the vibrant, beating hearts of rural life and religious devotion. They touched the people emotionally and ended up mobilizing them in ways the subcontinent had quite literally never seen before. And the real voices of this revolution? They were the poet saints. Like the Ajwars we see here, who along with the Nayanmars completely shattered orthodox barriers. For a long time, worship felt reserved for the elite who could understand complex Sanskrit. But these saints, they came from all different walks of life. Artisans, cultivators, women, and they sang these deeply passionate, moving hymns in the local Tamil language. By simplifying the language and throwing music into the mix, they brought the regional ethos straight into the mainstream. They basically made the divine accessible to everyone, which was a total game changer. Now, on top of all the art and politics, this era also saw some of the most profound philosophical dueling in all of Indian history. On one side of the ring, you had Adi Sankara. He pushed Advaita, or non-dualism, which was heavily rooted in traditionalist Sanskrit monasteries and the doctrine of Maya, or illusion. But then enter Sri Ramanujar, who completely challenged that framework. Ramanujar championed Vishishtadvaita, or qualified monism. So while Sankara leaned hard into orthodox traditions, Ramanujar was out there actively trying to widen the social base. He wanted to bring different groups into the fold through the doctrine of bhakti and a much more inclusive style of devotion. And Ramanujar's impact went way beyond just high-level philosophy. He was a true teacher and a hands-on reformer. He took control of monasteries, he actively modified temple rituals, and he even pressured authorities to allow marginalized social groups, people who had been historically locked out by the rigid caste system, to actually enter the temples. The Bhakti ideology he championed acted like this phenomenal social glue. It managed to bring together kings, powerful Brahmin priests, and the common people in a shared, unified devotion. All right, which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Look at these statues of the Myanmars, which are still deeply revered today. The political rivalries of the Chalukyas and Pallavas might have burned out over 1,000 years ago, but the cultural fusion that their rivalry forced into existence, it birthed a composite Indian culture that is astonishingly resilient. So, I want to leave you with this to chew on. How is our modern culture, the way we worship, the art we admire, the communities we build, still shaped by the echoes of these ancient temple songs and a 300-year political feud? The past isn't dead, guys. It's carved right into the stone, and it is still being sung in the streets. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.